listening to the Vichaar Manthan podcast.
Namaste. This is the Vichaar Manthan podcast live at the Bhaktivedanta Manor in Watford, Hare Krishna Temple. I am here with my good friend Mahimarnava, and we are going to be talking about all things dharma, simplicity, your way of life, your story. But first of all, Hare Krishna, thank you so much for having us here today.
Hare Krishna, and thank you so much. I'm actually incredibly grateful and very fortunate, so thank you so much for having me, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation and how deep we can explore and discuss. They say that actually discussion is where the most brilliant ideas and just incredible inspiration comes from, so I'm hoping for that. Thank you.
Excellent. And actually it's a great point, because I think the very premise of Vichaar Manthan is to take great ideas and thoughts and combine them together, really churn them to see what we get from that. That's inspiration, knowledge, wisdom, intellect. And that's the idea of the podcast, is to share that with people, disseminate dharma, help people understand and explore this concept, and hopefully we'll do some of that today.
Thank you.
Have fun at the same time. So let's talk a little bit about your past. So I've read a little bit. You brought up in London, you had a travel agent company, you were doing a few things. That's a far contrast to where you are now. So let's rewind a little bit. What was your upbringing like?
My upbringing personally was really difficult. I wish I could say it was like really smooth, but it was a very difficult one. I experienced a lot of challenges and difficulties that shaped me to be into something that I wasn't.
Okay.
So I had to grow up around family and friends that had certain expectations and certain ideas of where I should go with my life and what I should do with my life. I grew up from so I'm originally from Somali.
Okay.
So my parents, there's just a tradition that, when you grow up, become a doctor, become a teacher, get married at a certain age, do a certain thing. And unfortunately, I didn't tick any of the boxes.
Right.
Because for me, life didn't seem like a tick box. It wasn't a tick box. I was at a stage growing up where I was trying to figure out, who am I? Why am I doing what I'm doing? What is this culture about that I grew up in? So I guess we were in two separate, completely different chapters of life, where they tried to map everything for me, and I was just trying to figure things out. So I grew up around that. Externally, even though I was like going through that phase, externally I still thought like, okay, let me try and make them happy, let me try and make them pleased. But it's like sometimes when internally you're feeling something and then externally it just doesn't seem right, you kind of go and experience a conflict yourself. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I grew up feeling very conflicted within myself. Even though I was working, I was trying to run my own business, trying to inspire and support and help other people in my own life, I was going through a lot of struggles and difficulties.
I can resonate with some of that, needing to be a doctor, a lawyer, and that kind of thing. This certainly rings true for some of and I think a lot of people go through similar challenges where they're trying to impress parents or society, or they feel like they've got a set path or what success might look like, yet internally there's that dialogue, that conflict. I think someone once said to me, the Mahabharata is always happening. The Yuddha is taking place inside your mind. It's a constant battle.
That's a very interesting statement you make, because when, like you said, when we actually talk about the Bhagavad Gita, when we talk about these scriptures, it's not something that had happened 5,000 years ago. A lot of the challenges that Arjuna has experienced, a lot of the difficulties, we're also in his shoes. We're going through his challenges and difficulties just in modern times. So for me, it's like, when I think about it, I take a lot of inspiration from that. I take a lot of encouragement from that. And I think growing up, I've always been like that. I've always been the type of person to source out inspiration and see how I can implement that into my own life. I don't know if you resonate with that. If you
definitely, there's a project of mine that's called Spread Wisdom. I constantly want to take information, give it to other people. I feel like it's part of who I am, and it sort of fits in within my things. But yeah, it's super interesting. So there's also, you were talking about simplicity, service to others, and spirituality as being like your core callings. Could you take me through a little bit of those?
Definitely. But can I share something even
Absolutely.
beforehand that one of the topic I also wanted to touch on is validation.
Okay.
A lot of us, we actually pursue dreams, we pursue careers, we pursue things in life that we think or we expect will allow us to be validated. And I think that's the society and the world we're living in today. I'm not sure if you can resonate with that, but growing up, even though like I was experiencing this conflict, the reality was that there was an aspect of me that was seeking for validation. There was an aspect of me that was seeking for love and acceptance. And so therefore it's interesting, I was willing to compromise the very person that I am in order to just receive words of recognition, to receive some form of like, oh yeah, you're doing really well. And I think a lot of people struggle with that.
I think so. And in the sort of digital era, social media, you get little ticks to say you are who you are, and people are posting things online to give a persona, yet it is conflicting. I think there's a great Black Mirror episode, I don't know if you've seen it, where this lady needs to make sure she looks a certain way online, but she's not another way. And I think generally society is like that. It's the loss of meaning or purpose is all over the place. Yeah. So, do you think you found that?
Do I think I found that?
Purpose, meaning?
So do I think I found that at the time in the initial stage, I don't feel like I did. I felt like I was living other people's purposes. I felt like I was living other people's meaning of life. But now I'm really, really grateful and I think what it is that finding purpose and finding meaning also comes from spending time with ourselves.
Okay.
And I think that's one thing that in the Bhakti tradition, we learn a lot about, that there are times to invest in associating and connecting with other people and making friendship. But what it is that when we're always constantly orientated around people all the time, then we almost lose our own voice. We lose our ability to think. We lose our ability to hear ourselves. And I think I struggled my whole life feeling so bombarded with people's voices, so much. So then when I came to the Bhakti tradition, a very important element of us, my mentor always says that global revolution begins with personal resolution. So an important part was just learning to also be quiet and learning to go within and listen to myself. And so having been able to do that, I feel now I'm in a better space where I feel I found that purpose. And that purpose, here's the most important thing though when it comes to finding purpose. That purpose requires revisiting it constantly. I think when it comes to purpose, finding purpose is not a one-time affair. Yeah. It's a constant thing because you're constantly battling the outside forces. And then at the same time, you're trying to protect this little baby cub, you can say, of what you call purpose. And that takes, it's like a mother trying to protect a child. So you have to protect your purpose. Yeah.
And as you sort of strive towards goals, it not gets further away, but the challenges get bigger, the more it's bigger to go. So, I mean...
What about you? Would you say that you found that purpose?
I'm going to bounce off of what you're saying. I'm constantly being challenged in life to do bigger, better. And once you feel like it's like going through school, like you finish 1 year, you've got another year to go. You finish GCSEs, you've got A-levels, uni, and then it's constantly like a constant moving target.
But I think that's the challenge. You just said it. I think what it is that people focus a lot on doing bigger and better thing rather than deeper thing. And we live in such a society, wouldn't you agree? Yeah. Most of the time, people actually experience overwhelmment because they're constantly trying to look for the bigger and better thing. But everything that I'm sharing, I have to really give a huge thank you and gratitude to my spiritual teachers. And one of the things that's mentioned to me is that as much as life is about doing bigger and better things, it's just as important to do deeper things.
That's very interesting, for sure. And like a lot of the world is now getting on board with meditation and mindfulness, and like I think what you said was very interesting about spending time with yourself and not listening to outside voices, because it's very easy to spend the whole day with other people doing other things, and some of those things will be important, family life, work, etc., but how often do people just sit on their own in solitude, listening to their thoughts or channeling them or just feeling their own energy? I can imagine not a lot.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. That's why people...
Is that why people don't do it? Because it's hard?
Like, I remember the first time I started chanting, I'll be honest with you, it was the hardest thing ever. People have this misconception that meditating means that you'll feel peaceful. People have this misconception that meditating means that you'll feel blissful. But I always give the example to people. Imagine you hadn't visited your bedroom for, let's say, 5 years, 6 years, whatever. That's a long time, isn't it? Yeah. And then suddenly, like, you have to go back there and clean everything because it's caught up dust and webs and what's so on. So chanting and meditating is like that. It's like visiting an old room that you've been neglecting for many years, and then you have to clean up everything. So what are you do you expect everything to be just perfectly clean?
That's
no.
hard, yeah.
You're gonna come across webs, you're gonna come across old items that you've forgotten, you're gonna come across things that you were looking but you never thought it was in your room. So meditating is like that. When I first started meditating, it was almost like my trauma, my difficulties, my challenges, my relationship problems, everything was starting to surface. And people don't... One of the reasons I would say a huge contribution, one of the greatest thing that has really done a disservice to our society is this immediate relief that people are looking for.
Yes.
So therefore, actually meditating, when you tell people meditation is going to help you to feel peaceful, like, yeah, give it to me. But then when you tell people, yeah, meditation will help you to be peaceful, but there's some process to it, people are like, no, I don't want that process. I want the immediate result. So it is hard. And that's why it's like when you kind of present it to people in a way that is attractive to them, they'll take it. But when you give them the reality of what meditation is, they'll actually stay away from it because people don't want to deal with their inner false ego, their inner being, this part of them that they've been shoving to one side.
That's super interesting. Absolutely. So let's go back into your story a little bit further. So you come from a Somalian family. You would have been brought up in Islam. Tell me something about that. How was that for you growing up?
It's really challenging to always share this.
Sure.
But one thing that I for sure want to first say is that I owe a great debt and gratitude to my spiritual practice and how that was actually given to me. Because one of the things that has really helped me in my spiritual path, in my bhakti practice, was my practice as a Muslim.
Okay.
Because you see, fasting, praying, charity work, all these things are things that I have learnt from my time practicing Islam.
Awesome.
So I owe like a lot of great depth to my spiritual practice that I come from. And so it was really, really beautiful. But I think sometimes we come through a fine line where, and this is my personal experience, this is nothing to do with anyone else, my personal experience, we come a fine line between compassion and philosophy.
Okay.
And so for me, my greatest struggle was trying to be more compassionate rather than always correct. And I think that's the society we live in today. Actually, every faith is beautiful. Every religion is beautiful. Whatever one practices is beautiful. But for me personally, that was my struggle growing up. It was almost like the philosophy aspect was overwhelming me and taking over my compassion. So then I was becoming very judgmental. I was becoming very detrimental in my relationships with others and also my relationship with myself. It's not that we're always meant to be correct. Sometimes we're actually meant to connect with people from a heart to heart. Sure. And I think, so as a Muslim, I'd learnt a lot about self-discipline, regulation, also the importance of having a deep sadhana, deep spiritual practice. But I would say as a bhakti practitioner, it's allowed me, it's given me a lot of opportunity to develop deeper relationships, more fulfilling relationships, but, and I say but, also openness to have difficult conversations with people.
Yeah, I think something you said as we were walking in here today, that spirituality is for everyone, it's universal. Yeah. It's not just one sort of religion or way of life or thinking. So that's very beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
And I think it's something important for all your viewers and everyone in the world to know that it's almost like when you look at it from an ego angle, sometimes we're having this conflict with one another because of the name that we call God. You know, whether it's Krishna, whether it's Allah, and I know people often they struggle to hear this because it's like, no, there's a huge difference. But actually, you know, a rose by any other name is still a rose. So therefore, the divine, whether we call that divine Allah or Krishna or whatever it is, ultimately, we're all trying to connect our heart to that divine source, whatever one may want to call it. So I think one thing that's really allowed me to do bhakti practitioner is that it's allowed me to observe and see what are the similarities rather than what's always the difference, which is what the world is focused on right now, what people are focused on.
I think you're very right. People are focused on that, and definitely people will be disagreeing with this video and saying there's Dharmic, there's Abrahamic, etc. But I think the way you've put it is your quest, your connection with a higher power, with a higher spirit. People call that religion, people call it way of life, whatever. So, there's 8 billion people on the planet. Everyone's going to think something slightly different. So now you're a bhakti practitioner. What does dharma mean to you?
Dharma, that's a very good question. Dharma has many annotation and quotes. People can understand it as nature, many things. But for me personally, Dharma, I would say it means it's the nature of who we are. Everything, like our spiritual teacher says, everything has a particular nature. Like the nature of the fire is to bring heat. The nature of the water is to be liquid. So therefore, the nature of people is to love. So for me, Dharma means love. Dharma means that whoever we connect with, whoever we speak to, whatever we do it in a loving way. And when we can actually do it in a loving way, then we actually experience the greatest revelation. We experience the greatest empowerment. So I would say that in hindsight, Dharma means love. It means to be loving in your actions and whatever you do.
And it's that enactment of Dharma that makes us who we are. Yeah. And so in your transition then from where you were to how you are now, how do you see the world? Do you see it differently? Has Dharma, is the lens of Dharma different for you now? Would you say you were a Dharmic Muslim boy?
One thing is personally, I'm just speaking also for myself right now, it's just I try not to kind of put those to a kind of label, but from what I see in terms of Dharmic right now, the world you're asking me, right? Is how do I see the world right now? The way I see the world right now is just, and maybe people may still listen to this and say it's obvious, obvious, we also see it too. But I would say Dharmic has given me that vision to be able to see that the world is suffering in two ways, physically, mentally, and spiritually. And mentally, we may have scientists that are trying to come up with so many solutions for mental health and the problems that people are experiencing. Sometimes you see in the world that we live in today, people may have an incredible life. They're born into incredible wealth, incredible fortune, family, friends, but they're still perplexed, they're still challenged, they're difficult. So such people, what it is that even though they may externally be in the right environment, they're internally looking for something deeper. Then let's take on the physical realm. People may physically be well, they may be healthy, they may be going out exercising and doing different things, but they know that this is not the real experience. So therefore, actually the real Dharma has enabled me to be able to see that there is a deeper struggle, and that's a spiritual struggle that people are going through. And what is this spiritual struggle? That, people actually don't know who they are. People don't know who they are, so therefore they're spending money trying to train the body, trying to train the mind, trying to train all these things, but they're forgetting the most important thing. And that important thing is that themselves. There's a funny story actually once. There were these friends, they were in New York, and one of the skyscrapers. And what had happened was that, they were just kind of very distracted in their discussions. What had happened was that they forgot the key. So imagine the lift wasn't working, and they had to go all the way to the 30th floor, and then they were taking the stairs, and they were sharing some jokes with one another. And then one of them said, "Do you want me to tell you the real funny joke? We're all the way to the 30th floor, and we've actually forgotten the keys in the reception." Okay. So sometimes it's the reality, It's like people take everything with them, but then they forget the most important thing, which is themselves. So that's what Dharma has allowed me to do, that people are struggling, but do you want to know something else? People are not only struggling, they're in pain. Okay. I grew up very angry. I grew up very spiteful. I grew up whenever someone said harmful words to me or physically tried to do something to me, I would be so reactive, and I would be like, who do they think they are? But practicing bhakti, practicing Dharma, it's allowed me to see that actually sometimes people, when they behave the harshest, they're the ones that are seeking for the most love. So it's made me more tolerant and patient in one sense with the world.
That's interesting. So you were angry at anything? Or was there particular things? Was it just...
I guess I just had a lot of expectation.
Okay.
I had expectation from family. I had expectation from friends to be a certain way, to look after me, to nourish me with love and care and encouragement and support. And unfortunately, growing up, a lot of that I had lacked. So then, you know, it's like if you haven't experienced love yourself, then it's very difficult to be able to be loving towards others.
Absolutely.
If you haven't experienced so much compassion, because I grew up in a very abused home. So if you haven't experienced that compassion, that love, that care, then it's very difficult to give others what you haven't personally experienced yourself. So I guess what it is, in one sense, I was angry with my friends, my family, the immediate people I was connected with. But then that evolved. They say that when you don't deal with an issue, there's like you can either delay it or you can downplay it, but those two are not healthy, because then it's going to come up later on it's going to come up in a more detrimental way. It's going to come up in a more difficult way.
So it's important to deal with the issue at hand in whichever way, format, so that later on in life it doesn't become a challenge for you.
Exactly. So then I was really angry with people around me. And then that was because I haven't dealt with my immediate challenges I was experiencing in relationships with people around me.
So it seems like you're in a much better place now. I mean, you're living at the Manor and you know, from what you've said, bhakti, chanting, devotion, has that brought peace? Are you in a better space? What's it like?
It's brought clarity.
Okay.
I think that's what bhakti has brought into my life, has brought clarity. But nevertheless, challenges are always there. And I think one thing that I remind myself every day, and I always try and encourage others to remember, is that being a bhakti practitioner, it doesn't mean your problems go away.
You've got the tools now.
You have the tools. So I would say I have the tools. The problem hasn't gone away, and sometimes actually the problem magnifies because you know you're a bit more conscious and you're aware, so it magnifies even more. But the tools are there. And one of the most important tools I would say in spirituality is patience. I would say it's patience and forgiveness.
Wow. And that, I think those are drawn from compassion as well, right? Having compassion for either the person causing you pain or the challenge that's being presented. And having resilience to sort of deal with that as well. So that's very.
But how would you say you deal with I would say, what's your observation of that? Like, you're practicing bhakti yourself, you're practicing a form of spirituality. What would you say?
I have a commitment to spirituality for sure. How do I deal with that? Depends on the challenge specifically, but things like compassion will help me a long way to understand that the person, let's just say, causing me pain or conflict, hopefully isn't doing it maliciously or spitefully. They are on their journey, the way they are projecting or manifesting what they are doing, whether it's a lack of love or whether it's conflict with me, they're on their journey, they're on their story. So it's up to me to, they say, be the bigger man or rise above that challenge to understand that, look, we're all here. As long as I'm doing the greater good for people, as long as I'm trying to nullify harm and try to be compassionate and loving, I'll do the best I can. The rest is up to Prabhu, you know. It's,
I really like the way you put that there. And it kind of just gave me a little idea that actually being a spiritualist, being a bhakti practitioner is taking responsibility. I think you said something very beautiful there, that we can't blame others for often how we experience and how we digest the world. We have to take responsibility. And often when people feel like my emotions are getting out of control, it's because we're allowing it to. We're allowing the experiences, the situations, and the people around us to dictate and define how we feel, how we should respond, how we should react. But spirituality is about taking responsibility. And when you take responsibility, then you can deal with situations far more effectively.
Yeah, there's a concept I've taught once before about, so I ask people, like, have you ever sat at a bus stop? And people say, yes, of course.
Yeah.
Have you ever sat at a bus stop and not got on the next bus that's come along? People say, yeah, I have. So thoughts, ideas, feelings, or emotions are like the buses that come, and it's up to us to be disciplined enough not to get on the bus. So if we get on the bus, we'll ride that emotion around town. and it will take us everywhere we want to go, everywhere we don't want to go, because we don't want to go all the way around town. We have a destination to get to. So having the resolve, having the resilience to not get on that bus. But also, I think maybe more so in the West, people talk about mindfulness, meditation as being stop your thoughts, clear the mind. And actually, what I've come to learn, and through sadhana and practice, and speaking to people just like yourself, is that those emotions are not to be silenced; they're to be experienced. Like, feel the feeling, but let it pass. Like, don't let it overtake you. So it's been super interesting.
So I have a question, like this analogy that you gave, often a lot of people give, like the thoughts, the bus, and not getting on the wrong bus. What does that practically, like, it's something that I try to figure out my whole life, and now I'm coming to an understanding, but I would like to know, what does that kind of look like for you? What does it mean? Like, how would you do that practically? Like, you've got all these thoughts, and there's certain that you shouldn't respond to and certain you should. How would you respond to it?
It's a great question. Simple things like, if you're feeling something, so they say, don't make a decision when you're angry or upset, right? You can feel the feeling, you can be angry. I was reading this thing online where if you're angry with someone, write out a big text about why you're angry, but don't send it, right? Leave it in your drafts, and then the next day when you woke up, then read it and see if the sleep or the time difference is giving you clarity of mind to say, actually, I didn't mean all those things. It was a reaction, like you were saying earlier, reacting to these things. So time between thoughts, allow them to sit, allow them to set. How does it settle? But also even like happiness and joy, like absolutely feel them, but you can't stay in a constant feeling of joy, because if you have joy all the time, then what's the comparison? Then you're lost. Then it's almost a hallucination maybe, but I don't know. I'm no spiritual leader. I've got a lot to learn.
There's an interesting point that you made. There's something I came across recently. There's something called peak and rule. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
So peak and rule is a really fascinating thing, and something that I only came across recently, and it makes sense. Perhaps maybe it'll make sense for people. It means that often when we make choices and when we make decisions, is based on either the most negative experiences that we've had and felt, and then that dictates our decisions and choices, or the most positive experience we've had, and that dictates our choices. Now, the problem with that is that you may have the most positive experience and then forget about all the other negative experience around that, or you may have had the most negative experience and you forget about all the positive experience you've had that before. So for instance, like, I've had such challenges with relationship, and something I'm improving on. And and what it is that I keep just meditating and thinking about, like, this one really terrible relationship that I had. But in the process of all that, I forget about all the other beautiful relationships I carried with me. The most amazing people that have helped me, that have supported me, that have encouraged me. So it's really interesting the way that the mind works. And I think that's what the Bhagavad Gita talks about, that you've got to transcend the mind, and that you've got to use your intelligence. So it's a very fascinating psychology, and the peak and rule. So
I think we come from bias, and that's a great thing about sort of relationships, like typical Bollywood story. There's a guy and there's a girl, and he can't whatever because of all the previous ex-girlfriends. Also, I think generally day-to-day life, not just in relationships, people do have that bias. But I like what you said there about Bhagavad Gita and helping us. So obviously, at the Manor, Bhagavad Gita is a big part of your life. Is there a favourite?
I have a funny question for you first.
Go on.
What's your favourite movie that's influenced your idea of relationship?
I don't know about favourite movie, but I think growing up with the typical Kuch Kuch Hota Hai, Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gham type films. But there was one film, Mohabbatein, I don't know if you've seen it, but that was about lots of little love stories and how, oh God, where's this podcast taking us?
No, I just wanted to know, because it's really fascinating, it's interesting, It's like, sometimes we have such unrealistic expectations.
Absolutely. I grew up thinking what Bollywood told me love was what love was. Exactly. And it's not without the challenge, it's not without the conflict, but there is some solitude, I guess, I can take from some of those classic Bollywood films where love will always win. Love will always come on top. So no matter the challenges, and I've been through my own challenges through these types of things, and I feel like I'm in a much better place as a result of that. And it takes two. It takes two to tango, they say, right? It's and I think through my own marriage, I've come to realize that when there's two of you on the same team working for the same goals, and the people, they say, oh, it's one soul, two bodies, that kind of thing. Whether it is or not, I don't know. I strongly feel that way. Like when two people are on a path together, they will overcome challenges around them. So
it's fascinating you say that. And we're going to talk about the Bhagavad Gita for sure, but it also talks about how often when we come into a relationship, we're actually wanting the partner, the other person, to be the ideal person. But recently I've been meditating on, and it's really helped in my relationships. Instead of waiting for the ideal people in your relationship or someone to be the ideal person, have the ideal character, qualities, whatever, it's about actually ourselves being the ideal person. Why wait for someone else to complete you when you can actually learn to complete yourself?
yeah, the best I can do for you is be a better me.
Exactly.
And that's also, I think, with Ram Bhagwan, he's worshipped as the ideal human, not a god, right? Purushottam.
Yeah.
So that's very beautiful. So let's go back to Bhagavad Gita. So obviously quite a big part of your life here at the Manor. Is there a favourite verse or chapter or a line or a shloka that you go to?
That's a good question. Every morning I have this routine where whenever I wake up, I just take the Gita. So after I've done a little bit of meditation, I take the Gita and I open a random page.
Okay.
And it's almost like that's my meditation for the day.
Wow.
Whatever verse that I come across in the Gita, there's a message in it for me. And I meditate on that for the rest of the day. And 9 times out of 10, something happens or someone says something or an incident occurs that's like, wow. Like it's brought me back to that.
I was told growing up that if you have a conflict and you can't resolve it, open the Gita any page.
Exactly.
And maybe I'm naive to it, but I'll go back and check. I'll open it up tonight and have a look.
No, good try it. It's really beautiful, and because our mind is constant, like I'm going to talk about the Gita, but my mind is constantly bombarded, but this helps me to have some focus. And my favorite verse, I would say, is something that I always go back to, and I always like sharing it with people, and it's a constant reminder to be myself in this world. And where Krishna says to Arjuna, it is better to live your life imperfectly than to live someone else's life perfectly. So it's a very beautiful verse because often what it is that we're trying to be other people because we want their success, we want their popularity, especially like you said earlier on social media. Like in the past, I used to catch myself seeing how many followers did this person have, how many likes does that person has. Okay, what is this person doing that I need to try and do the same thing? But then what it is that even if you have their success, it doesn't mean you'll be happy, and it doesn't mean that you'll be able to sustain that. My mentor always says there's 4 problems with happiness in this world. It's futile, it's insubstantial, there's duality to it, and also the last one is that futile, insubstantial, duality, and the 4th one if I figured out. But the point I'm trying to say here is that even if you actually have someone's success, even if you have someone's kind of similar outcome, it's not going to last. And in the process of it, you're going to actually just lose who you are. So that is my favorite verse to go to because it means being committed to integrity, being committed to who I am, even when there's trends in the world that's going up and down. Because ultimately what it is that people are looking for stability in life. So if I myself, I'm struggling with that, then how can I really serve people? If I'm just going with the wind of what's the new trend, what's the new clothes you should wear, what's the new thing you should do, then how can I really serve? How can I really help people? That means I'm conflicted with the same thing that they are. So therefore for me, it's a huge, huge inspirational verse and something that I always keep dear to my heart, and it always guides me to make choices that it's not always choices that feels good. Sometimes when we make choices that feels good, we regret it later. And sometimes when we make choices that are difficult, it becomes easier to live with later. So it helps me a lot.
Very interesting. So let's talk about some of the influences that you may have had then. So you've talked about having a mentor and a spiritual guidance. So what's the best piece of advice someone's ever given you?
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for asking that. That really struck. the most beautiful advice someone gave me was my teacher, which said that to the degree that you are transparent, that is to the degree that you can receive support.
Okay.
So, like at the time, it was really difficult to hear that, because when we come before our spiritual teachers, even parents, children do this, adults do this, we come forward to our boss, we want to just showcase them the best part of us. You know, like we want to show them everything that's going well, but we don't want to show them everything that we're struggling with, because it's almost like often we don't want to be a burden to them, and we don't want them to see us as weak people that are there to be exploited. I think there's this thing about honesty in the world that we're living in today. People struggle a lot with honesty because it's rooted from the fear of they don't want to be exploited. But when he said that to me, it was almost like a weight that came off my shoulder. I was like, wow, like there are people that you can be honest with. There are people you can be transparent with. It doesn't always, like even me, like talking right now, it takes a huge level of vulnerability. It takes a huge level of transparency. But that was the best advice that my teacher gave me. And from there onwards, it's not about like going to everyone and being like totally, completely transparent.
Yeah, I don't like you, I don't like you.
Yeah, not even in that sense.
Sure.
Not just like, also just what am I struggling with? What am I going through? But it's about finding the right people. And when you find the right people and that you're able to be clear with them, you're able to be open about your struggles. And there's a beautiful thing about that, because imagine when you're trying to deal with a problem by yourself, it's hard. But when two minds come together and trying to deal with one problems, you'll find more options of solutions.
Yeah, I agree. Having a support network around you, even just like friends, family, but even outside of that, even if there's no name for it, having those people to sounding boards or challenge or shoulder to cry on or whatever it may be, sharing your experiences, I think comes a long, long way. So, I mean, and thank you as well for being vulnerable and sharing your story with us. And actually, I wanted to ask a question about how was it hard to let your family know that you're taking a path like this? Was that difficult? Were you able to be honest in those moments?
It was overwhelming.
Right.
And there's something that I really want to be vulnerable about, because I feel as spiritual people in spiritual community, we often neglect this. But recently I've been meditating on how many people struggle with mental health in a spiritual environment. We don't talk about that. We talk about the world struggling with mental health. We talk about people just in general. But what about monks? What about people that are like practicing a particular spiritual faith? And it's almost like people don't want to talk about it, because it's almost like you feel like I failed. Like, I don't want to talk about this. I failed. Like, it means that there's something wrong with me. So one of the biggest struggle that I had, and it kind of leads me to whole family challenges, was that even during my time in the ashram, I was struggling with mental health. I was struggling with suicidal thoughts. I was struggling with all these things, and it was the most hardest thing to express and talk with anyone about, because what it is that I was trying to maintain and sustain an image that I wanted to depict to other people.
Even as a monk?
Even as a monk.
Wow.
Even as a monk. These are the things that people don't talk about. These are the
people think that monks
share.
are the holier than thou,
Exactly.
and they've got this peaceful life, non-materialistic, but actually you're saying that
like,
those challenges still exist even through this.
You're right. Like, we're meant to have the answers. So if we're meant to have the answers, then why am I going through the challenges? I'm meant to be having the answers. So again, it comes back to this whole expectation, this whole labeling that I'm a monk, I'm this, I'm that. But it was really hard talking to my parents about like the spiritual path. It was the most difficult thing, the most challenging thing. It took a lot of courage. It took a lot of bravery, but also it took finding my own voice. And you know, it was hard, because I almost felt like they're my family. Why am I doing this to them? And I think most people start, like even when I'm here at the temple, I've been here for 6 years, I see many young people that want to take to this monastic life. They want to take to this spiritual path. The biggest obstacle for them is always, it comes back to the same thing, family.
Do people think they can come here and just forget about their past
They
life?
do.
Yeah,
They call that spiritual bypassing.
I can imagine.
So they do. They think that if I just come here, that I practice spiritual life, then I don't have to deal with any of it. But I always tell people that coming to a monastic life it's not a form of like taking all your problems away from you. The problems will always be there. Like till this day, I have to still somehow or another look for ways to pacify my parents, to pacify the people in my life. And it's hard. Some days I need break, other days I'm able to. So it's not that your problems will go away. The problems will always be there, but now you have the tools, you have the resources. And one thing that I also wanted to mention, which was really relevant, is that when it comes to finding your voice, it's hard. People think that love means conforming.
Okay.
People think that love means, I repeat that, people think that love means conforming. It means being what others want us to be. And that means even if they're happy but we're not happy, it's okay. I think you grow up, like, I don't know, would you say that you've kind of experienced
That's
that
very
yourself?
interesting. That is super interesting. Love means conforming.
Yeah. Well, love in people's eyes.
People think that love means to conform. Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to sit and think about that one for a little while, but it's super interesting, and I think it's a good shout for the people listening at home that if you've got thoughts, ideas, comments, please do email in. You can catch all the details online. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. But yeah, well, I'll have to circle back to you on that one. That's an interesting one for sure. I'll have to sit about that. I'll have to ask my wife. What I love it. But no, thank you for that. So I'll ask you a couple of quick superfire questions, and then we'll wrap up. So if you could have one superpower, what would that be?
I'm not very good with it, but if I had one superpower, to be able to read other people's minds.
Oh, really?
I really like that. I really like that.
Why? What would you do with that?
I don't know. It's like, I'm always someone that likes to know what is in people's thoughts. I've always been interested in that. Maybe if I know their thoughts, I know like better ways to also help them and serve them.
So I think that comes from a nice place. Like you want to help them.
Yeah. It's not so much like, what are
how can I
horrible things that they think, how can I manipulate them or use them? No. But I've always wanted to know because people struggle with me to share their thoughts and feelings. So I would love to have that superpower.
Sure. I often ask guests on the show if they'd like to make a commitment, because now there's a whole audience to hold them accountable to. But I feel like you're already committed to this way of life. But is there something maybe in your life that you could do more of, or you'd like to do less of? Is there something like that?
One thing that I want to do this year, because like when I first came into spiritual life, it was like a huge rush into it. It's like I have to be serious, I have to be committed, I have to be dedicated. But this year I'm learning to have more fun.
Okay. So
I'm learning to like just spend some time just unwinding, just like learning to just embrace also that humanness. And it's really important to have that balance between, and yes, spirituality, there's also humanness to it, but like just learning to just have just good connection, good relationship, and fun time.
Lovely. That's great to hear. You're writing a book.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Book. So, like I said, I lived as a brahmachari, as a monk for 3 years, and I've been living in a temple for 6 years now. And so therefore, in those 6 years, I've been through a lot in my life, and I've seen and heard people that have been through a lot in their life too. And with all those experiences, it's given me a depth of insight. So this book is about basically sharing those insights, but in a way that people can relate to. So you can say it's like life hacks, tips, advices, but from a spiritual perspective. It's really interesting I share that because not so long ago, before I became a monk, I used to go to these motivational programs. And I remember in one of those motivational programs, there was a young individual. He's been going there for like 15 years, 20 years, and then suddenly he committed suicide. And I was just like, how can someone be at the most motivating place in the world and still feel so depressed and feel so like low of themselves that they felt that they needed to leave their family and their children and just do such a thing. But then it made me realize that a lot of like these kind of places, these motivational, inspirational places, they give you the ideal, but they don't also share the practicality and the reality. Okay. So this book is all about sharing the ideal, what life can be like, but also that there's a process, there's a reality to it, there's a practice to it. And if you remain committed to that practice, you remain committed and very chaste to that practice, then you'll get that outcome.
Lovely. I look forward to reading it. And I think just to highlight from there is that it's the journey, not the destination. Yeah. I think we've been talking about that throughout as well. So
But I wanted to ask you one question.
Sure.
If you had any superpower, what would your superpower be?
No one's asked me yet, actually. Interesting.
Oh, yeah.
I think I'd like to fly,
Okay.
but I reckon that comes with its challenges. Like, is flying strenuous? Like, is it like going for a run? Can you only fly for a certain amount? Would you fly forever?
But why would that be then?
Well, I want to see more of the world, experience, get to places faster. If someone needs my help, I can get there quicker.
That's amazing.
I'm sure I'll have another answer if you ask me again. But, that'd be very nice.
That's so cool. So it seems like both of us is that desire to help people.
Absolutely, and maybe that's why we're here today.
Yeah, definitely.
But is there? I think we'll wrap up now. But is there some pearls of wisdom or something you'd like to share to our audience? Maybe if they're listening to this or watching this at home, what's their one takeaway? What's the one key message that perhaps you'd like to share with our audience?
I would say be open. There'll be a lot of challenges. There'll be a lot of difficulties. I was just sharing, like, one of the thing that in the Bhagavad Gita it says is what is nectar in the beginning can be poisonous in the end, and what is poisonous in the beginning can be nectar in the end. So sometimes as you're along on this life of journey and difficulties and challenges and problems show up, it's so easy to give up. It's so tempting to give up. It's almost desirable, like, let me just throw the towel and let me not do anything. But the easy choice is later on what happens here is that it dilutes our character, our ability to actually develop strong qualities. So I would say it's the same thing I always tell myself, it's not going to be easy, but always have faith. And with that faith, also have some spiritual practice. Have some morning routine, something that every day you wake up and you do that will help you to find clarity, that will help you to find purpose, and that will help you to remain along that purpose, even with all the millions of distractions you'll find in life. Because believe me, there'll be many, many distractions in life. I've had to go through that, and I still carry on going through that. But if you can do this one thing, have a positive morning routine, and also have that, and that positive morning routine comes and it develops the faith, and have that faith work on these two. Whatever challenges life throws at you, difficulties, you'll always learn, you'll always grow, and you'll always prosper, and you'll be able to share that with others that are going through similar struggles and difficulties in life that you have. So your story is your message to people around you. Don't give it up.
Lovely message there. Thank you so much again for sharing that with us. This is the Vichaar Manthan podcast live at Bhaktivedanta Manor in Watford. So thank you again actually to the Manor, and thank you to yourself for being here with us and sharing your message.
Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this, and I'm really, really grateful. You're such an incredible person, and I really hope that more people will watch this, not just this, but all your other shows, because I feel like I got a really positive energy from you and a really deep connection. So thank you. Really grateful.
Thank you so much. So Vichaar Manthan podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, all your favorite streaming platforms. Tune in to learn how Dharma can be disseminated further, and we're here to serve you. So let us know what episodes you'd like to hear about, or indeed go on to any of our channels. My name is Sumit Sharma. This was the Vichaar Manthan podcast. Namaste.